So customer development was something created by a gentleman called Steve Blank. And I guess since we don't have, I will type some URLs in so that you guys can check out the information. So Steve Blank was a gentleman. He's been the CEO of about 7 different companies. And he has been teaching at the University of Berkeley for years. And he wrote a very long book. It's extremely difficult to read, called The 4 Steps to the Epiphany. So what he discovered was that most startups don't fail because they have a bad idea or because they're bad programmers or engineers. They failed because essentially they built things that people just didn't want. And this kind of baffled him. And he kind of came up with a perfect solution. He said that the way to figure out what people want is to actually go and leave your office, so leave whatever cubicle that you're programming in, or your home, or your garage, and actually get outside of the building and talk to real human beings and figure out what it is they want. What are their problems? What are the issues that they're trying to deal with? So in many ways, he was railing against the standard mythical build it, enable, come dream that is so famous with things like the Segway, or I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with Cosmo.com or Webvan, or all these kind of pre-bubble companies that built this colossal amount of infrastructure for hundreds of millions of dollars, things like satellite phones, where by the time that they were ready to actually implement their solution, the market has so completely changed because technology had advanced at such a rate that their solutions were obsolete and useless, and hundreds of millions of dollars went out the window. So it was honestly a very simple solution. Now he has a great graphic to illustrate that, which I'm not going to show you, but you can go and look at steveblank.com or buy the 4 Steps to the Epiphany, and it's very straightforward. He said that there are 2 fundamental processes before you're ready to start scaling your company. So scaling means growing at a very large rate, hiring people, building infrastructure, and so on and so forth. So the first 2 steps were customer discovery, that is, figuring out who your customer really is, not just 20 to 40-year-old consumers. That's not a customer market. That's a vague generalization. That's a vague demographic. And so customer discovery, determining what their problems is, and customer validation. That is, determining if your solution is the right solution for those customers. So, and essentially what he was talking about is something that Mark Andreessen, a very famous guy, called product market fit. That is to say, if you have a product, let's see if I can to see myself back. If you have a product that must actually work with your intended customer group and with their problem. So you can't just build a product in and of itself and expect that somewhere some people will come and hopefully they'll buy this thing. Those 2 things absolutely must fit together. And it's the easiest to find that product market fit when you attack a clear customer segment. So to answer your questions, oh great, yes, thank you, Kanan, for sharing the PDF. So the questions are: do I run a social commerce site today? No, I do not. I work with a company called Luxor. We produce products and educational curriculum for accelerators worldwide. So the curriculum that we work with is used by 500 startups. It's used by the Singularity University. We just did a workshop with the White House Innovation Fellows here in the USA. So it's used by many different accelerators all over the world. So that was a quick question about the background. And now, how do you identify your target customer? So that is essentially customer discovery. And the principle of that is basically, I'm sure that Eric talked to you about build, measure, learn. Yes? Did he mention that to everyone? Yes, there's. Okay. So one of the fundamental things that Eric always talks about is build, measure, learn. I like to think of this in a much simpler way. So we all have, when you create a product, behind that product you have a lot of assumptions. You have assumptions about who will buy it, who will how they will use it, and so on and so forth. But these things are really questions. They're hypotheses. And what we need to do as business people is become more like scientists. So we need to figure out how to test those hypotheses as quickly and cheaply as possible so we can waste less time building the wrong thing. So how do I identify your target market? Essentially, you just guess. And then go out and check if your guess is right. Like, that is the most fundamental thing. But the hard part about that is, number one, actually making a coherent guess. So like I said, if your guess is everybody is going to use my product, that is not a testable hypothesis. You can't test that hypothesis because you can almost never be wrong, because you're always going to come up with some excuse as to why people aren't building, why people aren't adopting your product. Because, there's network effects, right? If only I got the first 1 million people on the product, then the other 900 million people that Facebook have would want my product, right? But that's completely absurd. If you can't get the first million people, if you can't get the first person on, then you have no reason to believe that person number 899 million is going to come on. So essentially, we just need to guess in a very coherent way, in a very specific scientific way. The way we do that in my company is using something called customer personas, which I won't get into, but it's kind of a very detailed archetype. So it's an imaginary person, but it's one very specific person, like Mary, who is 23 years old, who has 2 kids, and takes her kids to the ice skating rink, and she has a problem finding good health insurance for her kids. So that's a testable hypothesis, because we can go out and try and find people who are like Mary and start talking to them and discover, is Mary very concerned about insurance? Is she concerned about her kids? Is she a good parent, etc.? All these very specific questions that help us really understand our customer and stop thinking so much about our problems, how we perceive of the problem, and how our customers do. So the question is about enterprise products, and yes, it is in some ways harder. It is not necessarily more expensive. So the IT security company I worked for, yes, was an enterprise solution. The nice thing about working with enterprises and doing customer discovery is that they have specific people whose job is to buy things, and to buy things from you. Like, their job is to go out and talk to vendors and see if their solution fits. And the way that those people see if the solution fits is generally not a big demo. Okay? It's not, hey, why don't you install this on our system and see if it works? Like, that's impossible, because it's an enterprise IT environment. You don't get the option of ever actually installing everything. So generally, you actually just go and do a presentation of, this is what my product could do. And it turns out it doesn't even matter if your product actually exists. You just have to have a nice presentation and a demonstration. It could be a video of your product working. And very often those enterprises will invest in companies that will buy custom development work in order to solve their problems. And your product can be that custom development work. You can get paid to develop that solution and then try and scale it outside of that one enterprise that you're targeting first. So yes, in some ways it's a little harder. There are various different cultural things, like you have to have some appearance of, you have to have some social proof, right? You can't just walk in off the street with a torn T-shirt and say like, hey, I want to solve all your enterprise problems. But if you can get in the door, and again, these companies have people that their job is to go and talk to new vendors and figure out what they have. If you can get in the door, you can actually get a lot of information very, very quickly. So you have some very funny comments here. Won't that move too much towards the services model, and where to draw the line? Yes and no. Right? So one of the more famous lean startup techniques is actually, let me take one step back. So again, the purpose of a startup, the purpose of a big company is to execute a business plan. A 50-page business plan that is well thought out, it makes perfect sense, and it is a known environment. But again, in a startup, that 50-page business plan is useless because it's filled with assumptions that we don't know if are true. So the purpose of our startup is to learn as quickly as possible what works and what doesn't. It's not to build things as quickly as possible, it's to learn. And the only thing that we need to learn is whether or not anybody wants our product. So when you say, like, won't this move us towards more services? Well, yeah, if your first version of your product is entirely service. Like, let's say I want to have a new job application, a job site. Okay, so a site where people can go and upload their resume, and I'm going to improve it. The site will algorithmically make your resume very beautiful, make it very pretty, and make it more likely for you to get a job. So that's a product we could build. But to test whether or not anybody wants to pay for that product, couldn't I just go talk to one person and offer to do that manually? Couldn't I just get their resume, use Photoshop, use Word, and as a concierge, like at a hotel, manually service them and figure out what the best thing to do is? And it turns out this is a really valuable technique for a lot of companies, even consumer companies. And again, the point is not to service 100 million people like this, because it would be impossible. The purpose is to learn what that algorithm should be. So you have companies like Aardvark. So Aardvark is a good example. Another good example is Food on the Table by Manuel Russo. Let me type that in because it's hard to spell. So Manuel Russo, Food on the Table. So if you haven't heard of Aardvark, Aardvark was created by two gentlemen, or maybe three. Sorry, I forget. They came out of Google, and yes, they were doing search. But they were trying to address the questions which Google has a hard time answering. So they wanted to answer questions like, hey, where's the best place to get a fine lobster dinner in San Francisco? So their idea was that you would go to Aardvark, you would type in this question, and that question would get sent all over the place to people in San Francisco who might know the answer to that question. And they would be able to respond directly to your question, and you'd have this feeling of getting a real response from a real human being. But that's obviously, it's very complicated to build, right? So no, it's not quite like Quora in some ways. And Quora is more about voting up and getting the different responses. Aardvark was more about, like, give me an answer now, quickly, just to this one specific question that is usually very opinionated, right? But anyway, what they built, and this was also slightly before Quora, what they built was they just built this web page where people could type in their question, yes. But then the back end, their algorithm, was 3 interns sitting at their computers typing these questions into Google and trying to figure out via Google or via Yelp, like, where's the best place for lobster dinner? And then they'd send that answer back. So the person, the user, had this impression of getting, like, really great concierge service, like this amazing algorithm that finds the person who has the exact right answer to my question. But it was just 3 interns in the back. And what they did was they figured out, okay, well, people actually want this solution. They're coming back to the site. Now let's figure out how do we scale this. And they took each, yes, classic Wizard of Oz, and they took each bit of the human algorithm, and as it became difficult to scale, they automated that. And Manuel Russo did something very, very similar. I won't go into the whole thing. But he manually serviced this one guy, the CEO of the company, was going out and helping people shop, helping people decide what they want to put on their dinner table tonight. And he did that manually. And he collected money from the very first customer. I think $10 a month from this woman to go help her shop and figure out what to put on her table. And then he got another customer and another customer. And he got to the point where he could no longer do that much shopping. So he asked people, well, look, now why don't you go to this one supermarket and algorithmically pull in all the different coupons so it's easier for me to figure out what's on sale that week. And they automated that one piece. And the beauty of this was that he was able to learn a lot about what the perfect solution would be, because when they started out, they didn't realize, they thought that people would just want to buy whatever's cheapest. That was kind of their initial hypothesis. And what they determined is that the way people decide how to eat, at least in the US, is they figure out what meat they want to eat tonight, like chicken, and then they figure out, well, what sides would go with that. What sides are on sale, what vegetables are on sale that I could cook with chicken, and what's the recipe that would fit those things. So they wouldn't have learned that if they hadn't gone out and initially done that. And so the wrap-up of those stories is that Aardvark was actually sold back to Google for, I can't remember, it was 18 or 20-something million dollars. And Manuel Russo is doing phenomenally well. He's now covering tens of thousands of supermarkets and hundreds of thousands of customers. And all because he started really getting out of the building, really understanding his customer, what their needs were, what their wants were, and how they were trying to solve the problem themselves manually. So I hope that answers that question. So I'm sorry, I'm reading back here, so I'm maybe skipping some questions. So isn't that more like getting validation from the customer rather than build, measure, learn, loop? The build, measure, learn loop is getting validation from the customer. So one thing you should understand about the build, measure, learn loop. So the build, measure, learn loop, for those people who haven't heard about it, the classic example is, let's build something, okay, let's measure if it works, and then we've learned what works, and now let's change it and build something else. So Eric Ries created that concept. It goes back much further. It goes back from the military, or again from scientific inquiry in general, hypothesis, experiment, then measurement, right? But we all have different biases. So engineers have a bias towards building things because that feels extremely productive to engineers, right? I code, that feels great. It doesn't matter if nobody else ever sees the code, but I know that my white space is really good, it's clean, I refactored it, it's very dry, it feels extremely productive to me, although nothing actually happened. I didn't actually get any customers. Designers, on the other hand, they like to think and sketch, so they tend to start with that part of the solution. So they have a loop that they call think, measure, learn, or think, make, check. So think, make, check. So it's the equivalent of build, measure, learn, except instead of starting with build, they start with learn or think is their version. So let's think a lot, then maybe we'll make something and then we'll check to see if it works. And business people, of course, start with let's define some KPIs, right? Let's measure something. So these are all different biases. It just depends on where you start. The principle is really the same. Yes, lawyers like to make documents look pretty. So the other question you had here was, our product in the payment sector faces a chicken and egg problem in the sense that trust is very important when we go out and sell it, but we can't win it unless we have a few big players in our list of clients. I wouldn't say that's a chicken and egg problem. But yes, okay. So no, because you're not crossing the you're trying to start after the chasm. So I wonder if I can draw it. So I hope everybody knows what the chasm looks like. It's this little loop that goes up. The principle of how every market develops is that there are innovators. Innovators are kind of the first people who notice a problem and are trying to solve it. So very often those are the entrepreneurs, right? Then there are the early adopters. So those are the people who also have this acute pain, this acute awareness that there's a problem. They can't quite solve it themselves, but at least they go out and they're looking for a solution. They're trying to hack a solution themselves. So these are the people who buy like $20,000 flat screen TVs, okay, because it's just so cool and because they really they want to see something that large. These are the people who are willing to take risks on new technology, even though it's unproven and it might break. They might be, in fact, very often they're thrilled if there are problems because they love giving their input, right? They feel extremely satisfied when an entrepreneur or somebody who's building something listens to them and then implements something, or even just listens to them. And then there's what they call the early majority, and then the late majority, which are kind of the mass market. So when you say that there's a chicken and egg problem in terms of we can't win any customers, because we don't have any social proof from other customers, my gut reaction would be you're targeting the early majority before you found the early adopters. Like, you need to find the people who are in such pain. So if this is a payment sector problem, yes, of course, they like to have things verified. They like to have things that are secure. But you need to find a problem there that is so acute for some people that they're willing to take a risk on a new company. And that's always like a very small section of the population. But it's that section of the population, in this case it might be companies, that are willing to take risks on new technology. Okay, so I've been doing a few problem solution interviews. What do you do when almost every use case I have in mind has a segment of users who want and feel a need from it? Let me make sure I understand the question. So does each use case have a separate segment of users? Is that the problem? I guess I'm talking to Ranjan now. Okay, so pick one. Like, pick the one that is the most acute. That when you ask this person, so I hurt my ankle a few years back, so I have some pain in my ankle, and I have bursitis. If you went up to somebody like me and said, "Hey, do you ever have problems with your feet?" I would complain for about 15 minutes because it's a distinct problem for me. So I would ask you, like, which of these customers, when you say, "Hey, do you have this problem?" Whether it's payments or my resume looks ugly or I need a new pair of shoes, which are the people that feel this pain so acutely that they're willing to complain and talk about it for half an hour? And the longer they're willing to talk is generally a sign of how bad the problem is for them. So you need to figure out which of these different use cases is the most acute and start with that one. Okay? And the other ones maybe you're going to build next. Okay? But you always have to start with one thing. Because if you try and start running by moving both of your feet at the same time, generally you fall flat on your face. I hope that's a good answer for you. So hold on here. So pointers on B2B pricing. No, I'm terrible at pricing. I'm totally not going to talk about that. My only solution to pricing is to test rigorously and all the time. So B2B pricing, you don't have you can't do really scientific experiments with a large sample size, because if you're targeting the Fortune 500, there's only 500 of them. So you don't really want to A/B test pricing for that. I would always start high and then come down, because if you say it's pricing has a lot of impact on the perception of the quality of your product. So think about it like a bottle of wine. So if I tell you this bottle of wine is $40, sorry, I don't know the equivalent, but let's just say $40 US, like, that sounds like a really good bottle of wine. If I tell you this, present the same bottle of wine to you and say that bottle of wine is 50 cents, the gut reaction is like, wow, that must be a terrible bottle of wine. So I would always, whoa, my screensaver just went off. Okay. So I would always start higher and come down, because it's much easier to come down than it is to go up. Okay, so is the process of customer development and retention different for okay, I'll talk about that. Too many questions all at once. Is the process of customer development and retention different for non-optional segment sectors like education, medical, legal? No, I don't think so. So retention is kind of a different question. Retention has more to do, particularly in those non-optional segments that you're talking about, with legislative directives. So if the government says, everybody has to learn how to play the violin, then obviously that's going to be a very sticky solution, right? Because there's the government is saying this must happen, so these schools must buy a solution, so it's going to be much harder for them to retain. But the principle of customer development is going to be very similar. Obviously, you know that there's a need because the government is saying you must do this. Or something like, you must eat. Obviously, that's a non-optional market, right? But what we eat or how we choose to implement a solution, that's not optional, and we need to really do customer development and go out and talk to people. Okay, so sorry, I'm trying to talk and read is not one of my strong suits. So, is there a way to test a use case once you've picked one? Sorry, Ramahan, you have something? Okay. So, is there a way to test this? Yes. Unfortunately, when you're testing all of these different things, and I think you're referring to pricing, the method of testing varies significantly. What Eric calls an MVP, I like to think of as your minimum viable test. There are a lot of different ways to test things. There are things like we discussed concierge testing, Wizard of Oz testing. There's smoke testing, which is kind of just creating a landing page and pricing and seeing, does anybody click the button that says, yes, I want the plan for $20 and here's my email, or even here's my $20. So things like Kickstarter.com, if you guys don't know about that one, Kickstarter.com is a great way to test for market validation. So there are always ways to test things, but it varies depending on what your product is and what you're trying to learn. The most important thing to remember when you're trying to test something is to figure out what you're trying to test. And I know that sounds a little bit stupid and redundant, but most people go out and build something. Again, start with build. So if we're engineers, we have a very strong bias towards going out and building something. But if we don't know what we're trying to test, we're probably going to build the wrong thing. And if we don't know what measurement we're going to take in order to test that, then you maybe just built something that's not collecting the right data, that you haven't installed the right metrics, or you're measuring too much. And very often in these very early stages, what you really want is qualitative data, not quantitative data. So that's something to remember. So now somebody's talking in the marketplace scenario, chicken and egg, you need seeding. So yes. So I have a personal bias towards marketplace scenarios. I think they're always fake. Like, we always convince ourselves that this is a chicken and egg problem when one side of the market almost always has a more acute demand. Right, so let's take the classic marketplace. So men and women. Who has more demand in this scenario? Is it an equal chicken and egg problem? No. I mean, men in general, in most cultures on the planet, if you put up a web page that says, you can meet your dream girl here, you're going to get people signing up. They're the people with the most acute demand. That is not the case with the girls, right? That's why we have things like, at least in the U.S., we have ladies' night or ladies drink free, because they're the most difficult people to attract. And so when we approach that sort of solution, generally you want to, again, validate the riskiest hypothesis of your business. So in the case if you were doing a dating site, you would really need to validate the female side of the equation, because the male side is so easy. Like, we know that we can solve that problem. It's a known problem. It's a known solution. The only thing you need to do in order to attract men to a dating site is women. So you need to figure out how to attract women. And in the case of attracting women, generally the case is not like as many men as possible. Like, that is not the solution. That is almost intimidating for women. The solution is very often something completely different. Like OkCupid, for example, had a lot of great quizzes. Don't build a startup. Yes, there you go. So in the case of OkCupid, they had a lot of these dating sites started in a similar way. They have quizzes and little games that you can play that were very attractive to women. So women would join, and then they were able to attract the men. So you have to find a pain on each side of the market that you can solve in order to start bootstrapping that crowd. And the other general solution for marketplaces is to narrow in and get a niche. Right? So again, for a dating site, if I said I was going to have a worldwide dating site, and I get, let's just say I have 1,000 users joining me for that dating site, but they're in 1,000 different cities around the world, that is useless. Like, that has no value for anyone. But if I started a dating website, and I have 1,000 users, and they're all in Bangladesh. Like, well, now all of a sudden that's kind of useful, right? Because those people can actually meet with one another, and they can go out on dates, and they can talk to people, and they can get the value out of it. So narrowing in on the niche, a specific use case, again, like these things are really important. One of the hardest things for startups is generally customer segmentation. I strongly advise you look deeply into that. Okay. Will there be a way to contact Tristan after the webinar? So yes, you guys are all welcome to contact me. My blog is at grasshopperherder.com. There is a contact form there. So, sorry, whoever's mic is on and has some strange sort of song playing, great, awesome, thank you. So you're all very welcome to contact me. The only caveat I would say is that I'm going to be traveling for most of the next month in Europe, and it's going to be very difficult for me to respond to every question. So if you want to get a response, I would ask you to give me a very clear hypothesis. Describe your customer segment very clearly, preferably even using a customer persona. And that will allow me to understand your question very, very quickly and try and respond to it. I would also suggest that those of you that are interested in these sorts of discussions, go to this website, leanstartupcircle.com. That's a website. It's filled with a lot of really, really smart people. A lot of people who have been doing Lean for quite a while, who can offer fantastic advice and give you feedback on your hypotheses. And I would also recommend that you each kind of buddy up. So a lot of these things are like proofreading your own documents. You know, if I write a letter, I guarantee you I'm going to make some typos or some grammatical errors. And it doesn't take a PhD in Shakespeare to find those answers. It just takes somebody else looking at it with a fresh set of eyes. And it's very much the same thing with your startup. So you don't need an expert. Like, you don't need Eric Ries to come on and personally help you with your startup. You just need one other person who you can just talk to and bounce ideas off of. And very often it's like when you lose your keys. You know, you'll go to your wife and say like, oh, where did I put my keys? I came in, I put them down, and oh, I remembered. So she doesn't even have to say anything. You just need to talk to her, and all of a sudden you realize by talking out loud, that helps you clarify both your questions and the possible solutions. So I strongly urge you to do that. And never ever listen to experts, because ultimately I'm not an expert in your business. Like, I can't tell you what to do. You're the ones who have to be experts in your business. Like, there's no other solution. Like, that is your key competency, is being an expert in who your customers are and to learn as deeply as possible what their problems are. So the only thing that I can ever offer you, or that I think anybody ever should ever offer you, is feedback on how you're figuring out those hypotheses, how to ask better questions. So if you ask me a question over email, please don't be surprised if I just ask you a question back. Hopefully it'll be the right question. Any other questions? Oh, good. You're welcome. It sounds kind of funny, but I just feel like I'm talking to myself. I think the best tool so again, there's customer discovery, there's customer validation. So customer development is what Steve Blank called the whole process, and that includes scaling your company. So for customer discovery, I think the best tool is your mouth, and a piece of paper and a pen. I think are the best tools. Like, I know that there are a lot of tools, like there's all sorts of online versions of the business model canvas, and there are tools to like help you take notes. And I think all those things are extremely distracting. If you go out and talk to a real human being, the most important tool you can have is actually maybe somebody else there who can take notes, so that you can talk to somebody. Let me rephrase, so that you can listen to somebody, because you want to talk less and listen more. If you're talking all the time, you are pitching. You're not doing customer discovery. So the best thing that you can do is have a second person there. And the function of this second person in the conversation is to take notes, okay? Take notes on what the customer says, take notes on their reaction. Like when you talk to somebody and when you ask questions, the most important thing is to figure out, do they have an emotional reaction? What are the questions that they have to have an emotional reaction? Because those questions, like the questions of, hey, do you ever, like, what's a good example here? So like again, so I have bursitis on my right foot. So if I was an engineer or a medical doctor and I said, I'm going to build a website to solve the problem of bursitis, my landing page would probably look something like there's a guy there holding his foot and it's going to say, do you have bursitis on the top? And that's going to be a real problem because he hasn't gone out and talked to people. Because if he did go out and talk to people, he'd realize that nobody knows what the fuck bursitis means. Okay? That's a strange word. Nobody knows what that means unless you're an expert. Right? I know what it means. Okay? But nobody else means that. If on the other hand, that landing page said, hey, do you have a pain directly behind your Achilles tendon? Or behind your heel? Then that's the right landing page because people understand that. Oh, great. Now we're sharing information on bursitis in the chat. My point being, the way to figure out the right phrasing, the right language is, again, to talk to those people and ask for the right question. So if I go up and now talk to somebody and ask, hey, do you have bursitis? And their answer is just going to be a deadpan, no. Okay. But then if I ask the question, hey, do you have a problem with your foot? Do you have a problem like behind your heel? And they go, yeah, I have that problem. It's extremely painful. You can see the reaction on their face. You can hear what's going on. And the purpose of that second person who's taking notes is to not only take notes on their literal answers, but to see what are the right questions that we could be asking them. Because those are probably the same questions they're asking themselves. They're the same questions that they'll respond to in advertising. And they're even the same questions that they're going to type into Google, like those keywords, to find a solution. So having that second person there that can kind of offload some of that, so you can concentrate on listening and asking the right questions, and the other person can focus on writing down that person's reaction, noting which questions are really, really powerful, and also give you feedback on your interview technique so that you're improving your interview technique as it goes on. So that person is going to be that second set of eyes that can say, hey, you were leading the witness. You were asking the wrong questions, or your body language was a little bit strange. So that's the best tool. Sorry, I rambled on for a little bit there. So other question? Yeah, okay, so vanity metrics, again, the best tool for that is going to be your brain. So a vanity metric, for those people that are not familiar with the term, a vanity metric is a number, okay, so that makes you feel really good about your startup or about what you're doing, but has no action that it can possibly influence. So it's something like the number of people that signed up to your website. So if you graph that number out, so on day one you have one person signing up, on day two you have one person signing up, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So every day for 300 days you get one person signing up. And that number, the number of total signups, is just going up and to the right. Okay, so it always goes up. Even if those people never used your product, even if they hate it, it's always going to go up and to the right. And that's, of course, that's the famous curve you want. You want everything to go up and to the right, right? And that feels really, really good. But it's completely useless in terms of making accurate decisions. What would perhaps be a better number would be something like, well, what is the percentage of people that after signing up, 2 weeks after they sign up, they actually come back to the site, or they're still using the site? Or given the number of visitors to my landing page, what percentage of people sign up? So that's a number that, so I can test with 100 people and 10 people sign up, so 10% sign up. Then I can test with another people a different version of that landing page and see that 15 people sign up. Aha, so 15%. So the second version is a little bit better. It's a small sample size, Okay, but at least I'm measuring something that is more important. So I'm not necessarily looking for the pure number of signups. I'm looking for the conversion rate. And you can see how this could lead to bad conclusions because, for example, if I just looked at the number of signups and I get an article in TechCrunch, so 1 week I'm going to have 60,000 signups, right? That's great. But if my conversion rate was, 1%, can somebody please drop Tristan email or LinkedIn details? So just go to my, let me finish my thought. So anyway, so the next week, so let's say you just measure the number of signups, and 1 week you get an article in the press and you get 10,000 people visiting your webpage. And the next week you have no mentions in the press, but you put out a better webpage, only 100 people sign up. So your initial reaction would be, well, the first version was better because more people signed up. But that had nothing to do with the design on your webpage. It was just the fact that you were mentioned on some article. But if you were looking at the conversion rate and you saw that we had 1,000 people sign up the first week, but we had 100,000 visitors, so our conversion rate was 1%. For the second week, we only had 100 visitors. So we only had, let's say, 1,000 visitors, but 100 of them showed up, so it was 10%. Well, clearly that second version is better, even though the vanity metric says otherwise. So that's what a vanity metric is. So what was the other question? Cohort analysis? All right, so cohort analysis, I think, is kind of so again, the best metrics to measure depends on what you're trying to learn. So I highly recommend, hold on, let me type some here. So can't talk and type at the same time. So I highly recommend this presentation by Dave McClure, so Startup Metrics for Pirates. It's one of the ugliest presentations you'll ever see. It's like yellow text on black, so it's impossible to read. But it's very good on like what metrics are good to focus on. Yes, Arr. Startup Metrics for Pirates. Arr. It's very good way of saying like, look again. A lot of us are engineers. We tend to like, let's just measure everything. Like, right? Let's install Google Analytics, and then we'll have this whole massive page of data. Right? But data is not information. What you need is information to make decisions. So data is useless. If you're measuring every single thing on your website, you can spend hours each day staring at the numbers and not make any sense of it because there's only one number that matters to figure out if your experiment's a success. So if you're focused on, what the riskiest thing in my business right now is how do I acquire customers? I need a customer acquisition engine. Well, then let's look at the conversion rate for customer acquisition and let's just ignore everything else just for this week so that we can focus as a team and make progress on that one number, that conversion rate. So obviously, like, you do need to have a breadth. The number that you really want to focus on is revenue generally. But going back from revenue again, like you need customers to go through that funnel in order to get revenue. So AARRR sets out acquisition, activation, retention, revenue, and referral. And it's a nice, simple way of looking at those relatively broad numbers, and then you can drill in. So if you see like, my retention rate is really not good, then you can start drilling in and saying, well, why is that? Is it because we're not sending notifications? Is it because we have the wrong features? Is it because we have too many features, which is very often the problem, like too many features, too complex of a solution, too difficult to use. So that's probably the best thing to go look at. I don't understand that question. 5 W's after that? 5 Y's? Oh, 5 Y's, yes. So 5 Y's is kind of yes, 5 Y's is a good general solution. Again, for those that are not that familiar with, it's just when you have a problem, and this applies to business or in your personal life, you should ask why 5 times. So Yeah, so our activation rate is going down. Well, why is that? Well, it's because we don't have as much traffic to our website. Okay, well, why is that? Well, it's because we don't have as many press mentions. Well, why is that? Because we're not doing enough press outreach. Well, why is that? Well, because we fired our press person. So unless you ask why a number of times to try and really dig down and find the root of the problem, you'll be kind of putting a Band-Aid on the solution, on the issue. So that's very good. And everybody should talk to Yagat to figure out more about the 5 whys. I'm sorry, I probably pronounced your name wrong. Okay, good. Sounds good. I don't see any more questions. Oh, well, maybe I need to scroll down. What's going on here? So LinkedIn details. So my LinkedIn is really easy. So let me just spell my name here. If you type this into Google, I pretty much guarantee you'll figure out how to find me. It's very simple. You're welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn. It's better that you connect with me rather than me with you because I'm actually out of invitations. They won't let me send any more invitations. How do we plan our A/B test on the landing page? I'm not quite sure I understand the question. How do you plan it? I wouldn't plan it. I would just do it. I probably don't understand that. If you can clarify, I can maybe give a better response. So does everybody know what an A/B test is? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe that should maybe be a whole workshop in and of itself. But just to be clear, since we ended with talking with metrics, I honestly, like at the very early stages of company, qualitative details, qualitative information, qualitative data is much, much, much more valuable than quantitative information. So do not spend your time A/B testing and optimizing your landing page before you talk to people and figure out what are their problems, who are these people that we're trying to solve. So unless you get that customer segmentation right, no amount of A/B testing will help you, and actually it can hurt you significantly. Because if you optimize every step of your user experience, very often you'll wind up with this kind of Frankenstein product. Eric Ries has a great example of this, but he always says, I'm not sure if I can say this with a straight face. He says that if you A/B test long enough, eventually you'll wind up selling pornography because everybody clicks more on pornography. And it's kind of sad but true. Like a lot of people will A/B test their landing page and figuring out that like, wow, if I put a picture of a pretty girl up on there, then like people will click on that. And yeah, that's shocking. But if you're selling a CRM solution, that really doesn't help you. So don't A/B test just arbitrarily. Like you really want to, again, have a hypothesis. Like, well, if I'm trying to test whether or not people want a CRM solution, then maybe putting a picture of a pretty girl there is not really going to help me, even though that it might improve the metric, right? So anything could be a vanity metric if you do it badly enough. So yeah, always customer development. And I see one more question here. Focusing on end users, people don't want to pay. Well, nobody wants to pay. Nobody ever wants to pay. That's very true. Hardly ever do anybody actually want to spend money. We have a few hundred people on the beta list, so going outside with a pen and paper for validation here gives me mixed signals. It's a bit tricky. Yes, it is a bit tricky. So I would again go out and ask yourself, what is it about the people who say yes that is different from the people that say no? So when you go out and talk to 10 people, like what is the same about the people who get excited about your product? And again, don't just ask them, hey, do you want to buy this? Because people always lie to that question. Like it's the worst possible question to ask. Like, would you pay $20 for this? People are extremely bad at introspecting their future behavior. Okay, but if you see the look in their eyes, they go, I really want that. Like that's a good sign. So figure out the people who do get very excited and figure out what's the same about them. Why is this group of people that get super, super excited about this when I talk to them? Why are they different? What is it that's different about them than this other segment? And that's, again, getting closer and closer, understanding that niche segment more and more and more. So I hope that answers that. And, okay, we're being recorded, so great. So my pornography example will be recorded for posterity. I'm going to blame that one on Eric. Right, so Fortune 500 companies, what are the do's and don'ts? I'm not a big expert on that. I can't really answer that very well. All I can tell you is that even in IT security, again, those people were shockingly easy to find. Enterprises do have hordes of people whose job it is to go out and buy things. You just need to find those people. Actually, there's a book that I don't normally recommend, but Nail It, Then Scale It is a kind of version of Lean Startup. It's very similar. Then Scale It. And they talk a little bit more about business to business. And this is also a really good question to ask on the leanstartupcircle.com discussion group. Sean Murphy is much better at business to business sales than I am. There's also another gentleman called, what's his name, Scott Sambucci or something like that. He wrote a book on startup selling that's pretty good. And I think he's doing a presentation at the Startup Lessons Learned or a Startup Lessons Learned conference, both Sean and Scott. So those are probably the right people to ask those questions of. Okay, cool. Yes, so that's kind of this famous thing that's attributed to Sean Ellis. And I'm going to, okay, so this is a little bit nuanced, so please bear with me. So what Sean Ellis said was that he discovered, so he's a marketing person, and he worked with a lot of different startups. And what he found is that he found this kind of one question that he really likes. And I'll show you the link for his survey. It's here, survey.io. And the one question that kind of got the most traction for him was, if this product if you were unable to use this product, would you be very disappointed, somewhat disappointed, or not disappointed? So it's almost actually similar to Net Promoter Score in some ways. But anyway, what he said was that if 40% of the people who respond say very disappointed, they would be very disappointed if your product was no longer available, then that is a very good signal of product market fit. He never said that was the only thing required, right? There are other metrics that you still need to look at, like, are those people coming back? So I had a product 3 years ago that, if I remember correctly, it was 57% of the people responded like, yes, we would be very disappointed if your website never existed. And that product was really not that good. Those people were responding to their desire for a solution, but the solution, they weren't actually coming back to the website time and time again. So they were enthusiastic about what we were doing. They like, yes, we would be extremely disappointed, but they didn't actually like our product. So they didn't come back week after week. So he never said that that was the only thing that was required for product market fit, and people often misinterpret what he's saying in that regards. He said that that was a good sign. So it was kind of a necessary but not sufficient condition to say you have product market fit. And then the other thing that is kind of always commonly said about product market fit is if you have to ask if you have product market fit, you probably don't have it. So some people are saying, is it stuck? So I don't know now. Okay, no. Okay, so I hope that was kind of a good answer for you guys. I don't know if there are any last questions. So I'm sorry I couldn't get the presentation up, but like I said, I think it's a lot better to just talk to people and ask questions. So maybe some other time we can figure that out a little bit more, and I can kind of see what you look like and hear more of your voices. So Ramahan, is there anything else we should do? Yeah, I'll send you a link, but honestly, my presentations are mostly just visuals, and they don't say anything on the slides, so they can be a little bit baffling. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, the visual won't necessarily help you. A lot of the visuals that I use are on my blog, so there are a lot of articles there on like what is build, measure, learn, so on and so forth. So you're welcome to read that. That's probably a lot better than the presentation. But if you want to look at some of my presentations, sometimes I post them and SlideShare. So I think it's slideshare.net, and I think my name is Doridian there, which is horrible for some reason. So yeah, I'll try and send you some other things later, or I can send them via Skype. Okay. Cool. Perfect. So no, thank you, and please hopefully maybe next time maybe I'll be over in India sometime, and I hope that I can hear again more of your voices because it's lonely. I feel like I'm talking to a mirror here when I look at the screen. So hopefully I can hear more about what you guys are doing because I want to learn from you as well. Sorry. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, we need a way to kind of like hand over the microphone, so to speak. But like even if I can just see everybody and we can turn one person on at a time like that, that's really enjoyable. Yeah, that's honestly like that's really enjoyable and it's lovely. Or Google Hangouts is okay, but I think it's great if you guys can if I can see you guys and then I can understand more about what you're doing. Because I really do believe that all of the different lean startup circles everywhere in the world have something to teach each other. So I would like to learn from you guys, what are you learning in your businesses that we can learn from here in Silicon Valley and that people in Vienna can learn so that you guys can be talking to all the different groups all over the world and learn and exchange knowledge. So thank you very, very much. I really enjoyed it. And yeah, please let me know how it's going.